Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. So today I'm going to break down Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning. Why? Because this is really the culmination of everything I've been talking about for the last 4 or 5 years. This is the greatest example of what I had said was going to happen, which was when these quote unquote progressive people who make entertainment finally get on the back foot, they're going to try to go back to the way things were. They're going to try to hide the message like they used to. So this is a breakdown of the structure of the movie, not the actual plot of the movie. Therefore, there won't be many spoilers, but there may be a few smaller ones here and there, just because I'm explaining things that happen within the storyline and how they feed into the message. And apart from that, just to let you know, also, this movie is not the end of the Mission Impossible franchise. I can tell you that right now from breaking down the entire storyline. This is a legacy movie, which is to say what? This is to set up, supposedly, the Mission Impossible franchise so that you can exit Tom Cruise and have a new female-led, female core of the new Mission Impossible force, along, of course, with a token black guy who is feminized. And I'm also going to explain why Tom Cruise is not actually the hero of this movie. He's the main character, he's the protagonist, but he's not the hero. But very briefly, if you want a true traditional hero, I have 2 graphic novels, which are superhero graphic novels. One, Return to Form for Low Fantasy. Links for those are all in the description. And also there is a link for my new book, which is coming out. It's called Fade to Blue. There is a link in the description for the sign-up page for that book. If you click on that link, you can go over and watch the trailer for the book and see some of the art, as well as leave your email address if you want to be informed when the project goes live. But let's get back to Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning. Now, I'm going to try to go chronologically through this entire thing, as much as possible anyways. But before I even begin, I have to mention the following. The pacing of this movie is abysmal, and it doesn't need to be. There were editing and scene choices that were specifically made to make this movie exactly what it is. And it is the backdrop for everything that needs to be told within the message. And this will constitute the backdrop of my argument, which is, I agree, an assumption, but I think it is a well-founded assumption. It is the assumption that the editing is abysmal and the pacing is abysmal, according to the normal standards of making a movie. But that is not because of incompetence, it's because of design. Now, why do I say that? Well, I say that having experienced over the last 6-7 years the incompetence run through things like Marvel Entertainment through Marvel Comics. They literally say, fake it till you make it. No, I don't have the chops to be here, but I'm here anyways because someone held the door open for me because I am a minority of some kind. Yes, that is run straight through entertainment these days. And yes, it ruins a lot of entertainment. But here you have one of the largest franchises of the last 30, 40 years. This is supposedly, and I repeat that, supposedly the last movie for this franchise. It is starring basically the last movie star that they have in Hollywood, which is Tom Cruise. With that much on the line, incompetence is most probably not the answer to my question. The answer to the question of why the editing and the pacing is abysmal is because it is meant to be that way. It is designed to be that way. Now again, since this is the backdrop of everything that I'm going to say, let me answer the question of what exactly do I mean by that and the how and why of this entire thing. What I mean by the editing and the pacing is abysmal is the fact that we have a slew of much better Mission Impossible movies. Oh, by the way, I'll give you this caveat right at the beginning. It's not a bad movie, but at the same time, it's not a good movie. That's my personal opinion on the entire thing. Where it would rank within the entire Mission Impossible pantheon would be last, if you ask me. But moving back to what I was saying, you have so much to draw on with the other Mission Impossible movies. And they had very different tones, very different directors, very different places that they wanted to go with each of these movies. And yet, the action and the pacing, brought on by good editing, was spot on almost every time. And I would say for the majority of the screen time of every one of the movies, besides these Dead Reckoning movies. All it would take is very good editing, which again, they have plenty of practice at this with Mission Impossible, in order to increase the pacing to a breakneck speed so that it would be a much more enjoyable, much more fast-paced, much more action-filled movie, and a movie that would probably take about an hour and a half, whereas this movie is 2 hours and 50 minutes. But again, That is exactly the point. Why it is 2 hours and 50 minutes, nearly 3 hours if you count sitting in the theater for all the things that lead up to the beginning of the movie. You're in there well over 3 hours. But again, this is on purpose. Why? Because action, although it is in this movie, you get it in spades, is not the purpose of this movie. The purpose of this movie, again, you can go back and call it the message if you want, but really it is to sell the idea that emotion is what is supremely important. And how do you convey that emotion? Through long, drawn-out scenes, with long, drawn-out faces, by the way. And I'm not just pulling this out of my hat. Again, we've had vice presidents from Marvel Entertainment talking about how, yeah, sure, we have the action down. We're going to throw that in. But what's really important is the emotional context of the entire thing. And that's how they produce entertainment. So with that backdrop, let's get into, well, basically the movie. The movie begins with a snippet of Tom Cruise, as Tom Cruise, speaking directly to the audience. Basically telling them, hey, thank you for being here. And I thank you because, well, basically behind the message is Hollywood is really not doing well right now. People need to actually go to the movies in order for us to keep on making movies. Therefore, thank you. And maybe go tell other people that they need to come to the actual movie. Now, I'm going to lay that aside and come back to that point at the very end, but I'll just say this much here. In this entire movie, and in this specific little pre-beginning of the movie, Tom Cruise looks a little haggard. Sure, I know he's getting up there and he's put his body through some punishment through the years, to say the least, but this is Hollywood we're talking about. If they can't sell you the illusion that an action star from the last 30 years doesn't look good, red flag number one. Now, let me tell you a little bit about the pacing of the movie from the opening of the movie. You don't get the title credits for this movie for about 15 minutes. Again, 2 hours and 50 minutes runtime. I don't know the exact time when the first credits start to roll, but me sitting in the seat, it felt like 15 minutes before they actually rolled any credits. So I think that is a good estimation. But how does the actual movie begin? By breaking one of the cardinal rules of writing, which is show, don't tell. What do? They tell, don't show. Now I know this is a Mission Impossible movie, and they do the little recording and say, this message is going to self-destruct in 5 seconds. They do that, and that is exposition, and that is telling, not showing. But the normal pacing of a Mission Impossible movie is first to give you an action scene and then give you the little snippet of exposition. But for this one, nope, you're starting right off with exposition. You're starting right off with tell, don't show. Breaking, again, one of the fundamental rules of writing, and it's not because of incompetence. It is by design. And what is that design? That design is to introduce you to, first of all, the protagonist of the movie, who is Ethan Hunt, and then the actual hero of the movie, which is the voice on the recording. And who is the voice on the recording? Well, it is the President of the United States, who is a black woman played by Angela Bassett. Now, let's get into the pacing once again. This entire movie is based upon several writing tropes that they use over and over again sometimes. The basic one is a ticking clock. The entire movie is one large ticking clock, and each of the 3, beginning, middle, and end, have their own ticking clocks within the larger ticking clock. This recording, at the very first, starts the major ticking clock of the entire overarching story into motion. And again, the question is, if your movie is based on a giant ticking clock with each of the sections having their own smaller ticking clock, why would you create a movie which is edited in such a way that the pacing is incredibly slow? That works right against the idea of a ticking clock. Well, if you do it correctly, it might not, but the way that they do it here, it certainly does. Why? Because the point is that they allow the scenes to drag out so that a person can usually put on a long, sad face, maybe let a tear roll down their face, and appeal to the emotions of the other side. It happens over and over and over again. And how does that make any sense whatsoever when you have a ticking clock? Actually, several layers, again, of ticking clocks. You don't have time to waste. Why? Because again, the underlying message of this entire movie is that emotions are in the forefront. It is the exact opposite of what the basis of Western civilization is. And sure, it's been a growing idea for the last 500 years, I'll admit that. But the idea that actually built Western civilization is that, sure, you have your reason and you have your emotion, but the reason is the one who is the master. Emotions are important, but they are the servant of the master, and they have to be in any healthy individual, any healthy institution, any healthy society. If you allow it to become otherwise, it will degrade and fall apart. But the message that has been chipping away at the underpinning legs of Western civilization for the last 500 years is, no, it's the exact opposite. Yes, you have reason, but it is the servant of your emotions, and that's the way it should be. And that is the underlying message of this movie, and it begins from the very beginning when there is, over this recording, which is a tell, don't show moment, an appeal to emotion. Now let's get into another example of why the pacing is so bad and why this is so. Why the actual backdrop of the movie is emotion rather than its normal Mission Impossible action. Oh, by the way, again, I admit, all of these little things seem like little things. Seem like if you're looking at them independently, you can easily say, oh, it doesn't mean that. But if you take them as a whole and look at the whole picture and how these stack upon each other, you can see exactly where I'm going with this is what they're doing with the movie. So yeah, you could easily say, RJ, you got this wrong. One of these or two of these, you're just diving too far into it. You're thinking too much about it. Okay, that could be the case. But that doesn't change the overarching message that I'm talking about, which is there in the background. Because you're taking this whole thing as a culmination, as an underlying message. So there is a fight scene in the first half of this movie. And the fight scene culminates in the following. It is a scene where, again, they employ tell, don't show. And again, it's a interesting movie plot device that you can use over and over again and can be used well in certain circumstances. But it isn't used well here. It is the fact that Ethan Hunt gets into a fight. It is a fight to the death. He needs to escape in order for this entire thing to start moving forward. And what do? They put the culmination of the entire fight scene off screen. And not just off screen as in it just happened and then they move on to the next scene. No, there is a long, drawn out scene where they are showing the female lead and how she is watching the fight scene and the expression and emotion on her face as Ethan Hunt is fighting off screen. So again, pacing wise, this just draws things out to an unnecessarily long scene and long movie, and it shows you the exact emphasis of what they're trying to do right from the beginning. The emphasis is, yes, there is action in this movie. Yes, Ethan Hunt is there, and he's doing his usual action shenanigans. But the important thing is not Ethan Hunt, first of all, and is not action, second of all. The important thing is the female lead and her emotional response to this, what is essentially gratuitous, violent scene. The next scene of importance to this entire thing is where they pick up the second female lead. And this scene, again, long and drawn out, uses one of the worst tropes of your quote-unquote progressive storytelling, which people in the sphere that I'm in have been complaining about for years. It is what? It is the fact that in the middle of a fight scene, someone says, wait, and everybody just stops. First of all, there's no verisimilitude there. This is not the way life works. This is not the way the human body works. You're in that heightened state and you're in a life and death situation where this is your only chance to get out and someone jumps in front of you, who first of all you don't recognize, and says, wait. You don't wait. Secondly, what is the wait for? It is for Ethan Hunt, once again, first of all, to reveal himself. Secondly, to put on a sad face, and then to appeal to everybody's emotions. Again, negation of action, reliance on emotional manipulation. And when I say manipulation, I don't mean the characters of other characters. I mean the characters of you, the audience. This secondary female character, by the way, does listen to this appeal to emotion, as does the other character, which is the tokenized black character who is feminized. And so they both become part of the team. This then leads into the culmination of the first act, and that is, again, spoilers here slightly, a very well-tread writing trope, which is if you wish to hook the audience, because usually novice writers do this, and yes, I am guilty of this lazy trope as well, but it is to kill off a beloved character. But once again, to kill off a beloved character under a ticking clock, in a ridiculous way, by the way. I mean, these are IMF agents. They have high explosives in their pocket sometimes as gum. How can they not get through a gate? But anyways, the point being is to kill off this beloved character in order to hook the audience in with emotion. That's the whole point of this writing trope. Why it is considered lazy by some. I would say probably by most respectable writers, it is considered lazy. Now that brings us to the second act. And how does the second act unfold? Well, it begins by bringing you back to the black female president of the United States. It starts the actual ticking clock within the movie as a clock itself, but it sets up a dynamic which will be played over and over again within the rest of this movie. It is the fact that you have a room full of people which are divided by how they solve problems. There is the white men, and then there is the female and non-white characters. Oh, by the way, this scene is preceded by a small scene wherein you have this white male character who is obsessed with the past and looking basically for revenge, saying to Ethan Hunt when this entire thing is over, we're going to have a reckoning. Again, I said those lines in my head. That's what he's going to say. I know that's what he's going to say 5 seconds before he said it. So yeah, writing trope. And that was just to grease the wheels for that meeting that is divided between these two kinds of people. The white male characters and the non-white male characters. The white male characters are basically saying, we need to act rationally and logically, and the rational thing to do is X. Whereas the non-white female characters say, no, perhaps we should think about this in an emotional way. Now, I admit, it is very subtle in this scene. Why? Because that's how you ramp up to the ending. It is the fact that the people who are in the minority, the actual minorities, the people who are promoting the idea of let's think of this emotionally, look like they're in the minority, look like they're not going to be listened to, even though they include, to some extent, the President of the United States. She is sort of wavering one way or the other. And then, to this entire scene, you add Ethan Hunt. Ethan Hunt is the personification of let's think about this in a way that we can ultimately achieve our goal and get it done in a practical way, which is, to some extent, from the other movies, the representation of reason and the masculine way of doing things. And what does he do? Since he is on that side, but has now had this new emotional awakening, which again is shown by his reaction in the previous scene. But what Ethan Hunt does here is he says, look, I'm traditionally on your side, but I'm going to stand here with a long face and cry and say, appeal to emotion. And in doing that, he sort of bridges the gap between the two sides, and his new emotional awakening is what they go with. They say, okay, we'll give you that time, but only that time. You have until the last minute of this ticking clock to do this impossible thing. And yes, I realize this is Impossible Mission, but the whole point of Impossible Mission is a calculation of improbability. The probability of you actually doing this is near impossible, but we think you can do it. This is calculation. Calculation is rational. But here we have a replacing of the rational with the emotional. Now, as I said, this scene is played out over and over again throughout the rest of the movie. It is almost played out entirely again within a very short span of time within the next couple of scenes. You have Ethan Hunt trying to get to a submarine. He's on a helicopter. The two helicopter pilots are female. The crew member in the back is male. They've gotten to a point where they have to turn back. They don't have enough fuel. They have to turn back. So Ethan's whole reason for being there needs to be scrubbed. And what does he do? Again, ticking clock. With a long, sad face, he appeals to their emotion. Drawn out in a way where they don't have the fuel for this. And the male crew member in the back is saying, turn around, turn around. And the two female pilots are saying, no, we're going with him. We're going to stretch this. Which, by the way, I'd love to see the next scene where they tried to get back to the ship that they came from or the island that they came from and run out of fuel and crash into the ocean because you're not going to be able to run the helicopter on feelings. But hey, not going to show that. Even then, they give him only a few seconds and he decides to do something completely emotional. What does he do? He jumps out of the back of the helicopter into the ocean with no hope of finding the people, the submarine that he's looking for. Now, plot-wise, the people in the sub find him. And then you get a scene in the sub where you have the captain of the submarine, who, by the way, is a minority character, and he asks Ethan, why in the world did you do that? You had no hope of surviving. Why would you do that? And Ethan just basically says, desperation. And the captain says, you've come to the right place because I agree with you, basically through his words, which once again is saying, hey, guess what? I agree with your emotional take on this entire thing. You have an ally with me. Then again, we get into the rest of the ship, and the major people that Ethan is dealing with within the ship is a team of 3 men and 1 woman. One of those 3 men, spoiler, is working for the other side. The other 2 are sidelined because the butch woman, who looks like Vasquez basically from aliens, is the one that really gives Ethan not just relevant information, but also the emotional support that he needs. Now, again, to its credit, there is a long action scene drawn out, but it is basically a Mission Impossible scene. But then we cut away to the other part of the Mission Impossible, which is the rest of the team, and they're going to a remote station in order to find some relevant information that they absolutely need. Actually, that comes slightly before and slightly after. It is bookended by this entire thing in the sub, but that doesn't really matter. The point is that they come across this fellow, who, by the way, is just a appeal to nostalgia because he is a throwaway character from the Mission Impossible 1 movie, and his Inuit wife, who is this short brown woman who, even though being married to this guy for 20 years, doesn't know how to speak a lick of English. There is some confrontation with some Russians. There is a appeal to emotion, wherein you get the female character actually appealing to emotion, and Benji a little bit as well. But of course, they're not as good at it as Ethan is. Therefore, they fail, and then the entire thing goes into an action scene where almost everybody dies. Why? Because if you don't choose the emotion, that's what's going to happen. Death and destruction, that's it. Which is a little foreshadowing for the future here. But then we get into what I consider one of the, if not the, central scenes of the entire movie. Why? Because this scene does not need to be there at all. It is a throwaway scene. If you're looking at it through the eyes of, I'm going to see a Mission Impossible movie, this scene does not need to be there in any way. It is long. It is drawn out. It has no meaning nor connection to the rest of the story. It could easily be replaced by one shot that would take half a second, but they have it there. And again, the question is, in this long, drawn-out movie, why? Well, it's because of what the scene is about. The scene is the main female lead and the Inuit woman, who are, by the way, going to save Ethan, and they stop. They've already gone a significant ways, but they stop. They stop because the Inuit woman needs to go to sleep. So she has to give instructions via pantomime, because she can't speak any English, to Grace, who is the main female lead, so that Grace knows, first of all, how to drive the sled, secondly, how to defend herself in this wilderness, so she can go to sleep. Now again, why is this scene here? There is absolutely zero reason for this scene to be there, unless, of course, it is the fact that you're seeing the culmination of what this movie is trying to say. The culmination is, you see, you don't really need those rational things to communicate and get the job done. Those rational things like, let's say, language. No, you have these two women, one who is a minority, communicating with each other, being able to express what needs to be done because simply they sit there and listen to each other. And again, I admit, not entirely a bad message, but in the context here, it makes zero sense. 0 cents unless in this giant movie, nearly 3 hours, you have this long drawn out scene that means something, that is there for a reason. Then we get a scene with Ethan, and yes, I know, I've gone through the other Mission Impossible movies. I know, as Richard once said over at Comics Matter, he's basically a superhero, plastic man. You can bounce him against anything and he'll survive. But in this scene of him leaving the sub and the subsequent swim upwards, I just was taken so far out of suspension of disbelief. It was like, no, you would be dead in seconds. There is absolutely no way. I don't care if you were a superhuman. You would still be dead in seconds. But anyway, then you get these two women rescuing Ethan. Now again, in the middle of the movie, yeah, you can have that because it's a team movie to some extent. But when you take it with the culmination of the movie, you'll see again that it's just foreshadowing. So now we get into the third act of the movie. And in the third act of the movie, the president is becoming more and more prominent in the storyline. Oh, by the way, I think it's in the second act where the president is also asked a very relevant question to drive the message forward. It's not relevant to the plot if you're just going to focus on an action movie, an Impossible Mission movie. And that question that she is asked by another female member that is in the bunker that they're in is, have you spoken to your son? Again, appeal to emotion. At that point, she is still on the knife's edge going, no, I haven't spoken to him, but he might have to be sacrificed. However, within the rest of the third act, you have the ticking clock once again counting down, and you do get some good action scenes. But of course, it culminates in the conflict within the bunker of the white men and the non-white men and women, the emotion versus the reason. There's some stakes thrown in there, and the black female president of the United States decides to go with emotion. Now, we don't know exactly why she decides to go with emotion there. We can take a guess at some of the surrounding things that she says, but that's not revealed until the end of the movie. So once again, you get practicality. And yes, I realize the practicality would mean the death of millions, to say the least. And you have appeal to emotion. And appeal to emotion wins out. But then let's get back to the scenes with Ethan in them. And I'll just go over these briefly because, again, you do have a bunch of action here. Some of the action is good. Some of it is completely awful, especially the fact this feminized black character can't shoot somebody standing right in front of him. But you have a scene. It is one of the, if not the ultimate scene within the movie. Ethan needs to do something in order to get the ticking clock to the exact point he wants it to, and then the rest of the team needs to do what they're doing in order to save the world. Benji is supposed to be the one who does all of the computer work within this entire thing, but he gets shot, and therefore the two female characters need to take over. The one female character, the lesser one, is supposed to be there basically for protection. The second one, the major one, is supposed to be there because she's a good pickpocket and has quick hands. That's it. But no, Benji, who is supposed to be the one to do the main action of this entire thing, gets shot. He can't do it, and therefore he needs to instruct Grace, who is the pickpocket girl, in order for her to actually do what he should be doing, while at the same time, you might be saying, well, at the very least, he's informing her, but he's being kept alive by the bodyguard woman because she's doing what she can in order to keep him alive through some medical assistance. So again, Benji and his rationality and his practicality are needed, but they are subjected doubly to the emotional avatars of this movie, which are the main and secondary female leads of the Force, the Mission Impossible Force. And again, I'll admit, if this was a scene within a Mission Impossible movie in 1995, wouldn't care. But it's not. It's a scene in this movie. In this day and age, after we know exactly what Hollywood has been trying to do for the last little while. Now, that having been said, and that being the culmination of the movie, let's move back to a very important point, which I skipped over in order to get to the end of the movie. The important point is this. How in the world is Ethan Hunt not the hero of this movie? Well, let me put it this way. I've been taking writing classes since before the first Mission Impossible came out. I've been obsessed with heroes for longer than that. It is one of the standards of writing that if you have a hero in your story, in the end, he cannot be saved. In the end, if he's the hero, he must do the saving. If your hero is saved, in the end, he's not the hero. He might be the protagonist, but he's not the hero. The person who saves your protagonist is the actual hero. And who is the person that saves Ethan in this entire thing, allowing him to do what he needs to do? Who is the one who ignores the ticking clock? Who is the one who ignores the practicality, the rationality, and goes with emotion in order for him to complete his actual mission? Well, that, of course, would be the minority female president. She's the one who actually saves Ethan in order for him to do the things that he needs to do in order to have the culmination of the movie. And if she saves him, at the end, she's the hero of the movie. According to all writing norms that I have been taught since the late 80s, this breaks the norm of what you're supposed to do with a hero story, because she's the hero. He's the protagonist, he's not the hero. And then you get the cleanup of the entire movie. One of those cleanup scenes is the president getting off a plane, walking down to this military group and finding her son and giving him a hug. This, again, is the emotional stakes which she depended on in order to make the emotional move which made her the hero of the entire movie. Again, this is the underlying message of emotion wins out in the end. And secondly, you get the final scene where you have the people who are left alive in the impossible mission force of this movie. Ethan, Benji, the two female characters, and the one feminized black character, all basically meeting up in a very crowded area, nodding to each other and walking away. Now, one important point before we get to the very end is you have Ethan, who has in the palm of his hand the entire fate of the world at this point. The power that is more powerful than the entire nuclear arsenal of, yes, nuclear. I'll say it again, nuclear, for the fellow who keeps on putting in the comments, I can't say it right. Don't care. The entire nuclear arsenal of the entire world in the palm of his hand. And why is he allowed to have such power? Why? Because he's proven through this entire movie that he's been feminized. He's proven that he's not the same character that he always was. He's proven that he is an emotional sop who will never, ever use that power. And then, of course, Ethan and Benji drift off, as do the other characters, and this is the setup, as I would attest. This is not the last Mission Impossible movie. This is the nod of Ethan and Benji saying goodbye and having these two female characters and this feminized black character be the new heart of the new Mission Impossible movies. That's what they're trying to do here. Mark my words. There will be another Mission Impossible movie with these three characters as the heart of the Mission Impossible force. Now, after having gone through all of that, let's do, as I said at the first, and go back to that message which Tom Cruise pinned to the first of this movie. This appeal as Tom Cruise to the audience to say thank you for coming to the actual theater. Perhaps we can actually keep Hollywood alive by people coming to the theater like you. Do it again. He makes that appeal. I don't think anyone could argue with that point. He's making that appeal. We need to keep Hollywood alive by having people go to the movies. But then he is the star, not just the star, but also the producer of the following movie. And the following movie is to say what? If Hollywood is going to survive, you need to swallow the tripe of the message. So, if I've given you anything new to think about, hit like, hit the shield in the lower right-hand corner of your screen to subscribe, and leave me a comment. Tell me what you think about all this. And don't forget, there is a link in the description for my new book, Fade to Blue. You can leave your email address there after you watch the trailer if you wish to be informed when the project goes live. It is basically a film noir type of setting with a supernatural storyline. All right, I'll leave it there. I'll see you later. Bye.